The Arctic wind at Coldwater Naval Air Station never blew gently. By 5:45 a.m., Samantha Sam Reynolds was already deep in the maintenance hangar, her worn toolkit slung over her shoulder, the harsh fluorescent lights casting sharp shadows across rows of gleaming fighter jets. They called her just maintenance, but she was about to prove she understood these machines better than the pilots who flew them. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The newer F-35 Lightning IIs and visiting Eurofighter Typhoons sparkled under the industrial lighting, their surfaces polished to mirror perfection, unit insignias bright and pristine. Squadron emblems caught the light like expensive jewelry. Then there was her assigned aircraft. Parked in the far corner of the hangar, away from the showpieces, sat an F-18E Super Hornet that looked like it belonged to a different era. Once glossy paint was dulled by countless flight hours, engine intake worn to bare metal, scuff marks around the access panels that hadn't been properly addressed in months. Someone had scratched away the Squadron patch entirely. The tail markings were regulation, but plain as cardboard. Sam approached without fanfare. She'd learned to move like a ghost here at Coldwater, invisible among the elite pilots of the 87th Naval Combat Squadron. The other maintenance technicians, mostly assigned to the newer F-35s on loan from the Air Force, clustered near the break room. Their laughter carried across the hangar, the easy confidence of people who'd never been told they didn't belong. She'd arrived at Coldwater 4 months ago, fresh from completing her advanced avionics certification. What should have been a career milestone felt more like exile. While her classmates got assigned to cutting-edge stealth fighter programs, Sam found herself here, supposedly gaining valuable experience with the Legacy Platform Maintenance Initiative. The reality was different. A pale rectangle of paper fluttered on her aircraft's fuselage, taped near the cockpit. Someone had scribbled on it in black marker, "Non-critical maintenance only, awaiting replacement." She didn't touch it. She never did. Opening her tablet, Sam pulled up pages of hand-drawn circuit diagrams, pencil notations covering every margin. While the other technicians relied on manufacturer schematics and computer diagnostics, she'd been studying electromagnetic interference patterns in relation to radar system performance. No one had asked her to. But if she was going to be stuck maintaining obsolete aircraft, she was going to do it perfectly. From the operations office, a voice boomed across the morning air. Flight assignments for today's exercise. Teams were listed by aircraft type, starting with the F-35 pilots, then the Eurofighter Typhoons and the remaining Super Hornets. There was no mention of her jet, no acknowledgement of her work. Someone behind the office door muttered about hangar queens and outdated junk. A few heads turned and grinned, but not at her. Sam climbed her maintenance ladder slowly, not from lack of confidence, but from respect for the machine. Inside the cockpit, she settled into the familiar routine. Avionics diagnostic, systems check, radar calibration. On the right side of the panel, a piece of silver tape covered where a unit designation used to be. The lettering beneath had long since worn off. She had yet to replace it. Through the canopy, she watched the F-35 pilots stride past in their flight suits. One gave a sharp salute to his crew chief, then glanced toward her aircraft. He said something to the woman beside him, something too quiet to hear, but they both laughed. Not cruel, just certain. Certain she didn't matter. Commander James Harrison ran the morning briefing from the operations center. Inside, the air was too cold, the hum of industrial air conditioning underlining every word that carried weight. Folding chairs faced wall-mounted screens where flight paths rotated and color-coded. Precision. Sam stood against the back wall, tablet flat against her thigh, waiting for maintenance priorities that never included her assigned aircraft. "Diamond formation leads," Harrison called out without looking up. Two F-35s up front, Typhoons in flanking positions, remaining Hornets in rear guard. Altitude ceiling 39,000 feet. A pause. Pilots exchanged nods. Someone cracked knuckles. Maintenance priorities, Harrison added offhandedly. Focus on F-35 sensor suite alignments. Secondary. Attention to Typhoons. Super Hornets are tertiary. Just keep them airworthy. No one turned around. Lieutenant Alex Parker, leaning against a file cabinet, tilted his chin toward his wingman and whispered something. The other pilot's shoulders shook with silent laughter. Sam stepped toward the maintenance roster on the back table. Parker slid it aside before she could reach it. Not sharply, not with hostility, just as if she didn't need it. Just keep the old birds running, someone said. Don't bother with the advanced systems. As she moved toward the exit, she caught the sound of someone behind her making screwdriver turning motions. Another voice responded. Make sure you tighten everything. Wouldn't want to lose our museum pieces. Outside, the morning crew had begun their pre-flight inspections. The F-35s lined the main taxiway, canopies already open, pilots receiving their final briefings. Two crew members leaned against a fuel cart, their conversation floating clearly across the concrete. Did you see Maintenance Girl in the briefing? Still logging imaginary performance numbers? She's probably got spreadsheets for our targeting systems. Bet she graphs radar cross-sections like it matters for those outdated birds. Please, she's here for basic repairs, not the real tech. Their laughter was soft, confident, like nothing they said could echo beyond the moment. Sam passed them on the outer edge of the hangar, her pace steady. She didn't correct them, didn't flinch. Her toolkit hung from her shoulder in its usual place, the leather handle worn soft from countless hours of use. The tablet in her hand held more than maintenance logs to 14 pages of hand-drawn electromagnetic interference patterns, notations and radar calibration corrections from yesterday's flights. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. She found a quiet spot beside a storage crate and sat down back straight, tablet on her knee. From her pocket, she pulled a stylus with a cracked tip and began marking a detailed template she'd drawn the night before. Each axis represented radar emissions across frequency bands. Each curve was an F-35 stealth profile, recorded from careful observation and confirmed through passive electronic analysis. The data was hers alone. No official scans, no documentation requests. Just one technician watching and learning what no one bothered to teach her. After 20 minutes, her tablet held 3 new graphs, carefully labeled and shaded. A light wind pushed cold air through the open hangar doors. She wiped the screen clean and kept writing. Behind her, the hangar buzzed with activity, tool carts clanging, radios crackling, the smell of jet fuel and hydraulic fluid thick in the frigid air. The visiting European pilots were already performing pre-flight checks, their movements efficient and practiced. She could hear fragments of conversation, jokes about American coffee and Arctic temperatures. None of it included her. She was maintenance. The outsider, the technician who fixed things but didn't understand them. At least that's what they all believed. Sam closed her tablet and stood up, brushing condensation from her uniform. In 3 hours, the squadron would be airborne, engaged in mock combat while she remained grounded, relegated to basic maintenance duties. She'd collect her data, file her reports, and return to the sound of silence. But today felt different. Today she had something no one expected. She had a plan. The morning briefing should have been routine, but tension crackled beneath the surface like static electricity before a snowstorm. Sam sat in her usual spot, back row, corner seat. Close enough to hear, but far enough to be forgotten. The pilots filled the front rows, their flight suits crisp, patches gleaming, voices carrying the easy confidence of those who'd never been questioned. Commander Harrison clicked through the tactical display, his pointer tracking flight paths across the Arctic training zone. Today's exercise simulates a contested airspace scenario. Alpha Squadron, he nodded toward the 4 F-35 pilots, will play aggressor. Your job is to penetrate Bravo Squadron's defensive perimeter and achieve simulated kills. Lieutenant Parker raised his hand. Sir, what about the maintenance staff? Should we expect all aircraft to be fully operational? A few pilots chuckled. Harrison barely glanced at Sam. Maintenance has been instructed to prioritize the F-35s and Typhoons. The Super Hornets are secondary. They're not critical to this exercise. Lieutenant Emily Chun, one of the few female pilots in the room, caught Sam's eye for a split second. There was something in her expression, not sympathy exactly, but recognition. Chun was flying Bravo 3, one of the newer F-35s. She'd been at Coldwater for 10 months and had somehow earned the respect Sam was still fighting for. Electronic warfare parameters, Harrison continued. Full spectrum jamming authorized. This exercise will test your ability to maintain targeting solutions in a contested electromagnetic environment. Sam made notes, her handwriting steady despite the familiar sting of dismissal. Around her, pilots were already discussing tactics, forming the kind of casual partnerships that happen naturally when you're included in the real mission. The F-35s have a distinct advantage in stealth capabilities, Harrison said. Their radar cross-section is significantly smaller than the Super Hornets. This exercise will test your ability to leverage superior technology against legacy platforms. Parker leaned back in his chair. Sir, shouldn't be too difficult. The electronic warfare suite on the F-35 can blind those older radar systems in seconds. Don't underestimate tactical advantage, Harrison warned. Captain Muller and his Typhoon team didn't come here to lose. They're here to prove their electronic warfare capabilities in Arctic conditions. Sam had been monitoring the electronic emissions from all aircraft for weeks, studying their patterns from ground-based equipment. Parker was wrong. The European pilots weren't struggling with the conditions. They were adapting, evolving, finding weaknesses in American electronic warfare tactics that no one wanted to acknowledge. She documented it all in her private notes. Jamming techniques that circumvented F-35 defenses, radar frequency shifts that penetrated stealth profiles, subtle electronic signatures that exploited American electromagnetic blind spots. But no one asked for her input. No one ever did. After the briefing, Chun approached as Sam gathered her materials. Walk with me, she said quietly. They stepped outside into the bitter cold. Chun glanced around, making sure they were alone. I've been reviewing the maintenance logs you file, she said. Those electromagnetic diagrams, they're good, really good. Sam was surprised. She hadn't realized anyone paid attention to her work. Thank you. I just try to understand the patterns. The patterns matter, Chun said, more than these guys want to admit. I've been flying against the Typhoons for 3 weeks now, and there's something they're not telling us in the debriefs. What do you mean? Chun hesitated, then pulled out her phone, showing Sam a photo of a tactical display. This is from Tuesday's exercise. Look at the electronic countermeasure effectiveness. She pointed to a series of numbers. The Typhoons are breaking through our jamming 40% faster than the intelligence briefings predicted. Either our data is wrong, or they're using techniques we don't understand. Sam studied the image, her mind racing. She'd noticed the same discrepancy in her observations but hadn't connected the dots. They're frequency hopping before engagement, she said. Watch their emissions pattern. They're anticipating our jamming bands before we even broadcast. Exactly. But when I brought this up to Commander Harrison, he said the intelligence was classified above my clearance level. Chun's voice carried frustration. They're treating this like a public relations exercise instead of real training. What do you want me to do about it? Keep collecting your data. Keep watching. And if you see something that could help us level the playing field. Chun paused. Find a way to let me know. As Chun walked away, Sam felt something shift inside her chest. For the first time since arriving at Coldwater, someone had acknowledged that her work mattered. More than that, someone needed her expertise. She spent the next hour in a quiet corner of the hangar, reviewing her electromagnetic data with new eyes. What she'd thought were random emissions began to reveal themselves as tactical techniques. The Typhoons weren't just jamming better than expected. They were jamming smarter, and in 2 hours, they'd be demonstrating these techniques while she remained grounded, unable to share what she knew. The afternoon sun barely penetrated the cloud cover as Sam completed her pre-flight checks on her assigned Super Hornet. Her aircraft might look worn compared to the polished fighters around it, but every system was meticulously maintained. She'd seen to that personally, learning to optimize problems that the other technicians were too busy to address. As she climbed down from the cockpit, she noticed Captain Miller watching her from beside his Typhoon. He was older than the other European pilots, his uniform bearing the subtle marks of long experience. When their eyes met, he gave her a slight nod. Professional, nothing more. But it was acknowledgement, and that meant something. Sam closed the access panel and began her final checklist, muscle memory guiding her through the familiar routine. Around her, the pilots were preparing for combat, their radios crackling with tactical communications. In 30 minutes, they'd be airborne. The F-35s would hunt, the Typhoons would defend, and she would remain on the ground, collecting data that no one wanted to hear. Except today, she wasn't planning to stay on the sidelines. Today she had questions that needed answers, and a plan that would shake the foundations of Coldwater's elite pilot culture. As the aircraft taxied toward the runway, Sam made her way to the Electronic Warfare Control Center. This small room, filled with monitoring equipment, was typically overlooked during exercises considered merely a safety backup rather than an active participant. The technician assigned to the station, Private Jenkins, looked surprised when she entered. "Reynolds, what are you doing here? Shouldn't you be in the hangar?" Sam placed her tablet on the console. "Commander Harrison asked me to monitor the electromagnetic emissions during the exercise. He's concerned about anomalies in the Typhoon's jamming patterns." It was a lie, but a calculated one. Jenkins, young and inexperienced, wouldn't question an instruction supposedly from Harrison. "Nobody told me," he said, looking confused. "Last-minute decision after the briefing. You can call him if you want confirmation." She knew he wouldn't. Nobody wanted to bother Harrison during an exercise. Jenkins hesitated, then shrugged. "Whatever. I was just watching the screens anyway. Not like I do anything important here. Why don't you grab coffee? I've got this covered for the next hour." After Jenkins left, Sam quickly connected her tablet to the monitoring system. Within minutes, she had access to the full spectrum of electromagnetic emissions across the training area. Every radar ping, every jamming signal, every electronic countermeasure in real time. Through her headset, she could hear the pilots' communications as the exercise began. "Alpha Flight, check in," came the voice of Lieutenant Parker, leading the aggressor formation. "Alpha 2 ready. Alpha 3 ready. Alpha 4 ready." "Bravo Flight, defensive positions," Lieutenant Chun responded. "Bravo 2 ready. Bravo 3 ready. Bravo 4 ready." Sam switched to the encrypted channel used by the Typhoon pilots. Using a decryption algorithm she'd developed while studying their communications, she could now hear Captain Meller coordinating his team. "Eurofighter Group, deploy electronic countermeasures on my mark. Remember the frequency pattern we discussed. 3-step progression, 5-second intervals." This was it, the jamming technique she'd been tracking. The Typhoons were using a sophisticated frequency hopping pattern that anticipated American countermeasures. By the time the F-35 pilots adjusted to one jamming frequency, the Typhoons would already be broadcasting on another. Sam watched the electromagnetic spectrum display as the exercise unfolded. The F-35s began broadcasting standard jamming patterns, attempting to blind the Typhoon's radar. But just as she predicted, the European aircraft shifted frequencies in perfect synchronization, staying one step ahead. "I'm losing radar contact," Chun's voice carried tension. "Their countermeasures are too effective." "Stay with standard electronic warfare procedures," Parker ordered. "They're just getting lucky with frequency selection." But Sam could see it wasn't luck. The Typhoons were following a mathematical progression, each frequency shift precisely calculated to exploit gaps in American jamming coverage. She documented this pattern in her private notes, tracking how they systematically explored the electromagnetic spectrum until finding the precise frequencies that penetrated F-35 defenses. Her radio headset crackled with the control tower. "Frequency, electronic warfare station, this is command. Are you monitoring the anomalous emissions patterns?" Sam hesitated. This was her moment of decision. Regulations stated that maintenance personnel weren't authorized to engage in tactical communications during exercises. Breaking protocol could end her career at Coldwater, maybe end her naval career entirely. But watching her fellow Americans get systematically defeated by tactics she understood felt like betrayal. She keyed her microphone. "Command, EW station. I'm tracking the emissions pattern. The Typhoons are using a progressive frequency hopping technique that anticipates our standard jamming sequence. Silence. Then, EW station, who is this? Where's Private Jenkins? This is Technician Reynolds, sir. I can explain the Typhoon jamming pattern and how to counter it. Reynolds, the maintenance tech? Get Jenkins back on this frequency immediately." Below, she could see the exercise unfolding through the monitoring system. The Typhoons had split into two pairs, approaching the F-35 formation from different angles. Chun's aircraft was isolated, surrounded by jamming signals that rendered her advanced sensors useless. "Bravo 3, you've got two contacts converging," Parker called out. "Can you establish targeting?" "Negative, Alpha Lead. My sensors are completely jammed. I can't distinguish targets from background noise." Sam knew exactly what was happening. The Typhoons were using the cross-spectrum jamming technique she'd identified weeks ago. Not random electronic noise, but precisely calibrated interference that exploited specific vulnerabilities in the F-35 sensor fusion system. "Command, this is Reynolds," she said, ignoring the order to stay off the frequency. "The Typhoons are using oscillating bandwidth jamming. Lieutenant Chun needs to recalibrate her sensors to frequency band Echo 7 to cut through the interference." "Reynolds, you are ordered to clear this channel immediately." But Chun had heard her. "Echo 7, are you sure?" "Affirmative, Bravo 3, recalibrate now. They're frequency hopping in a 5-second pattern. After Echo 7, shift to Charlie 9, then Alpha 3. Sam watched the electromagnetic display as Chun's F-35 adjusted its sensor settings. Suddenly, the jamming effectiveness dropped dramatically. "I've got contacts." Chun's voice carried disbelief and triumph. "Clear targeting solution on both Typhoons." The simulated missile lock tone filled the radio frequency. "Bravo 3, simulated kill on Typhoon 2, Chun announced. "Typhoon 1 is evading." The radio fell silent. "Even they." Command tower seemed shocked by the reversal. Captain Muller's voice came through, calm and professional. "Impressive countermeasure, Bravo 3. Typhoon 2 returning to pattern altitude." But Sam knew she'd crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. She'd interfered with an exercise, violated communication protocols, and revealed tactical information that was supposed to remain classified in official channels. "Electronic warfare station, this is Commander Harrison. Technician Reynolds, You are ordered to stay at your post until relieved. Do not leave the station." She acknowledged the order, knowing that severe consequences would follow. As the exercise continued, she monitored the electromagnetic spectrum in silence. The remaining F-35 pilots had heard her instructions to Chun and were now applying the same countermeasures against the Typhoon's jamming techniques. The tables had turned. Through the window of the electronic warfare station, Sam could see a vehicle racing across the tarmac toward her position. Security forces most likely, coming to relieve her of duty and escort her to Harrison's office. Whatever happened next, her career at Coldwater was probably over. But as she watched the American pilots successfully counter techniques that had been defeating them for weeks, she couldn't bring herself to regret her decision. She'd broken the rules to help her fellow service members learn and improve. In the military, that could be viewed as either heroism or insubordination. She was about to find out which. The debriefing room felt like a court-martial. Sam sat alone at a small table, still wearing her maintenance uniform, while the pilots filled the seats behind her. Commander Harrison stood at the front, his face carved from ice, while Captain Eleanor Wright, the base's executive officer, occupied a chair to his right. Wright was a legend at Coldwater, a pilot who'd flown electronic warfare missions in 3 different conflicts. Her presence at what should have been a routine exercise debriefing meant Sam's breach of protocol had reached the highest levels of command. "Let's start with the communications violation," Wright said, her voice quiet but carrying absolute authority. "Technician Reynolds, you were specifically briefed that maintenance personnel do not participate in tactical exercises or override command communications. What emergency justified your breach of protocol?" Sam stood, hands clasped behind her back. "Ma'am, I observed electronic warfare techniques being employed that I believed could be countered with information I'd collected during previous exercises. That's not an emergency, technician. That's a judgment call you weren't authorized to make." Behind her, she could hear whispered conversations. Some pilots were probably enjoying her public humiliation. Others might be wondering if she'd just ended her career over a training exercise. However, Wright continued, and Sam felt her heart stop. "The frequency hopping countermeasure you described to Lieutenant Chun was accurate and effective. Where did you learn it?" "Ma'am, I've been collecting electromagnetic emissions data for 8 weeks. The Typhoon pilots have been using consistent patterns that create sensor confusion. I identified countermeasures through analysis of their jamming techniques." Commander Harrison stepped forward. "Ma'am, Technician Reynolds' role is basic maintenance, not electronic warfare analysis. That's handled by intelligence specialists with appropriate clearance levels." "I see." Wright's eyes never left Sam's face. "And what did your intelligence specialists conclude about these jamming patterns?" Harrison hesitated. "Ma'am, we're still evaluating the data." "For 8 weeks?" The room went dead silent. Sam realized she was witnessing something unprecedented. The executive officer challenging her own intelligence apparatus in front of junior officers. Wright stood and walked to the tactical display. "Captain Muller, would you join us?" The German pilot rose from the back of the room, his movements precise and measured. As he passed Sam, she caught a glimpse of something in his expression. Not hostility, but professional curiosity. "Captain, is it accurate that your pilots have been employing electronic warfare techniques designed to confuse American targeting systems?" Muller nodded. "Yes, ma'am. These techniques are part of standard Eurofighter electronic warfare doctrine. We assumed American intelligence was familiar with them." "And the countermeasure Technician Reynolds described to Lieutenant Chun?" "Correct and effective. It's taught in our own training programs as a defense against similar techniques." Wright turned back to Sam. "Technician, where did you learn this countermeasure?" "Ma'am, I developed it through analysis of the electromagnetic patterns I observed. I noticed that the frequency hopping technique created predictable Mathematical progressions which could be anticipated through specific recalibration sequences. You developed it yourself? Yes, ma'am. The room erupted in whispers until Wright's glare restored silence. Ladies and gentlemen, Wright addressed the room, we have a situation here. Our intelligence apparatus has spent 8 weeks evaluating electronic warfare information that one of our maintenance technicians analyzed and applied successfully in real time. Meanwhile, that same technician has been relegated to basic maintenance duties and told her analysis doesn't matter. She paused, letting the words sink in. Captain Muller, in your professional opinion, what's the value of Technician Reynolds' electronic warfare analysis? Ma'am, her understanding of our techniques is more sophisticated than most of your intelligence briefings. The countermeasures she's identified would significantly reduce our tactical advantage. The words hit the room like a physical blow. Here was one of Europe's best pilots essentially saying that Sam's work was superior to official naval intelligence analysis. Commander. Harrison's face had gone pale. Ma'am, I'm sure there are procedural reasons why. The only procedural failure I see, Wright's voice cut like a blade, is our inability to recognize and utilize the talent sitting in this room. Technician Reynolds, you'll report to my office at 08:00 tomorrow. We need to discuss your future role in this program. As the meeting broke up, Sam felt both relief and anxiety. She wasn't being discharged, but she wasn't sure what came next. Chun approached as the room emptied. That was incredible, she said quietly. I've never seen Wright dress down intelligence like that. I'm not sure it was worth it, Sam replied. I still violated protocol. You saved me from getting outmaneuvered. In real combat, that technique might have saved my aircraft and my life. Captain Muller appeared beside them, his expression thoughtful. Technician Reynolds, might I have a word? Jean excused herself, leaving Sam alone with the German pilot. She expected criticism, perhaps anger at having his tactics exposed. Instead, Mueller smiled. You analyze electromagnetic patterns like an engineer, not a mechanic. That frequency recalibration sequence you suggested, it showed you understand our techniques better than most pilots who've been flying against them for years. Thank you, sir. In the Luftwaffe, we have a saying, knowledge without application is wasted potential. Today you applied your knowledge. It was the right thing to do. As Muller walked away, Sam realized that everything had changed. For 8 weeks she'd been invisible, relegated to basic maintenance, told her expertise didn't matter. Now suddenly she was at the center of attention. But attention in the military could be dangerous. Some people would see her intervention as necessary. Others would view it as insubordination that set a dangerous precedent. Tomorrow morning she'd learn which interpretation would define her future. That evening, alone in her quarters, Sam reviewed her electromagnetic analysis one more time. Pages of carefully plotted frequency patterns, jamming techniques developed through weeks of patient observation, work that had been dismissed as unimportant until the moment it saved a fellow service member from defeat. She thought about Captain Mueller's words. Knowledge without application is wasted potential. Maybe it was time to stop being just maintenance. Sam stood at attention outside Captain Wright's office at precisely 0800, her uniform pressed to regulation perfection. Through the frosted glass door, she could see Wright's silhouette behind her desk, along with another figure she couldn't identify. Enter, came the captain's voice. She stepped inside to find Wright seated behind her desk with a man in civilian clothes occupying one of the guest chairs. The man was perhaps 50, with sharp eyes and the bearing of someone who had spent decades in uniform before transitioning to civilian status. Technician Reynolds, please be seated. Wright gestured to the empty chair. This is Dr. Victor Norris, from Naval Electronic Warfare Command. He's here to discuss your analysis. Norris extended his hand. Technician, I've reviewed your electromagnetic data from the past 8 weeks. Impressive work, especially considering you developed these techniques independently. Sam felt off balance. She'd expected disciplinary action, not praise from an electronic warfare specialist. Thank you, sir. Dr. Norris, Wright continued, has been investigating reports of advanced electronic warfare techniques that our intelligence community has been slow to address. Your intervention yesterday brought this issue to official attention. Norris opened a folder thick with documents. Technician, are you familiar with the concept of predictive electromagnetic analysis? Yes, sir. Anticipating how electronic warfare systems will adapt during engagement based on mathematical modeling. Exactly. For months we've been receiving fragments of information about advanced European tactics, pilot reports, sensor data, exercise outcomes, but no one was connecting the pieces until your analysis. He pulled out several documents, spreading them across Wright's desk. These are reports from exercises at Whidbey Island, Red Flag, Alaska, and 3 NATO training events. All describe similar jamming anomalies, sensor confusion, and unexpected tactical defeats. Sound familiar? Sam leaned forward, studying the papers. The patterns were identical to what she'd observed at Coldwater. American pilots struggling against techniques they couldn't understand or counter. Sir, these are all describing variations of the same frequency hopping doctrine. The specific techniques vary, but the underlying mathematical progressions are consistent. That's exactly what we suspected. Norris's voice carried excitement. But you're the first person to identify the core methodology and develop effective countermeasures. Wright stepped around her desk. Technician, what Dr. Norris isn't telling you is that his investigation has revealed systematic failures in our electronic warfare training. Your work has exposed significant gaps in our tactical preparation. The implications hit Sam like a physical blow. This wasn't just about cold water or training exercises. This was about real combat readiness. About American pilots facing electronic attacks they weren't prepared to counter. Ma'am, I was just analyzing emissions patterns. I didn't realize. You didn't realize you were conducting the analysis that our electronic warfare specialists should have completed months ago, Wright finished. The question now is what we do about it. Norris gathered his documents. Technician, I'm prepared to offer you a position with the electronic warfare development team. You'd be working directly with combat systems engineers, developing countermeasures for emerging threats. The offer hung in the air like a challenge. Sam had spent 8 weeks fighting for recognition, for the chance to contribute meaningfully. Now she was being offered exactly what she'd wanted, but something felt wrong. Sir, what about the other pilots? Here, Chun, Parker, the others who've been struggling against these techniques. They deserve to know what I've learned. Norris exchanged a glance with Wright. That's complicated. The techniques you've identified are now classified. Dissemination would be handled through proper channels. Meaning it could take months for this information to reach operational units, Wright said quietly. The military bureaucracy moves slowly, even for critical intelligence. Sam thought about Chun's frustration, about the pilots nearly outmaneuvered by tactics they didn't understand, about all the service members who would face these techniques without proper training. The classification process would protect the information while pilots continued to lose exercises and potentially real battles. Ma'am, permission to speak freely, Wright nodded. The pilots here at Coldwater are facing these techniques. Right now today, they're good pilots being defeated by electronic warfare tactics they could counter if they had the right information. Waiting months for bureaucratic approval means accepting continued defeats. What are you suggesting, technician? Wright's tone was careful but not dismissive. Sam took a breath, knowing her next words would define her career. Ma'am, I'm suggesting we share this information immediately with the pilots who need it. Not through classified briefings or official channels, but through practical training that gives them the tools to succeed. Norris frowned. Technician. You're talking about bypassing established security protocols. Sir, I'm talking about preparing American pilots to win battles. Isn't that what we're here for? The room fell silent. Wright walked to her window, staring out at the flight. Lineward jets were already preparing for the day's exercises. Dr. Norris, she said finally, how long would it take to classify Technician Reynolds' analysis and distribute it through proper channels? 4 to 6 months minimum, possibly longer if it requires additional security review. And how? Many training exercises will we conduct in that time? Approximately 35 to 45, ma'am. 35 to 45 exercises where American pilots will be defeated by techniques we know how to counter, because we're too concerned with procedure to share life-saving information. Norris shifted uncomfortably. Captain, there are established processes. For good reasons. Dr. Norris, I've been flying electronic warfare missions for 20 years. I've seen good pilots lost because critical information was buried in classified reports they never had access to. I won't let that happen again. She walked back to her desk, her decision clear in her posture. Technician Reynolds, you'll continue your maintenance duties for now, but I'm also assigning you to develop informal training scenarios that will help our pilots understand these electronic warfare techniques. Nothing classified, nothing that violates security protocols, just practical education. Ma'am, how do I share tactical countermeasures without revealing classified analysis? Wright smiled for the first time since she'd entered her office. You're an engineer at heart, technician. Engineers teach by showing, not telling. Norris gathered his documents, clearly unhappy with the direction of the conversation. Captain, I'll need to report this decision to my superiors. You do that, Doctor, and you can tell them that Coldwater Naval Air Station prioritizes pilot preparedness over bureaucratic convenience. After Norris left, Wright turned to Sam. Technician, you've got 48 hours to design training scenarios that will teach our pilots to counter these techniques. Can you do it? Yes, ma'am. Good. Because starting Monday, you're not just maintenance anymore. You're going to be the teacher. As Sam left Wright's office, her mind was already racing with possibilities. For 8 weeks, she'd been forced to watch in silence as good pilots struggled against superior electronic warfare techniques. Now she had the chance to even the odds. But she also knew that teaching these techniques would make her a target. The intelligence community didn't appreciate being shown up by junior maintenance technicians. Norris would report this conversation, and there would be consequences. Still, as she watched the morning's exercise preparations, she felt something she hadn't experienced since arriving at Coldwater: purpose. Tomorrow the real training would begin. Monday morning arrived with the kind of Arctic clarity that made every detail sharp and unforgiving. Sam stood beside the electronic warfare simulator at 0730, watching pilots file into the training room. The usual pre-exercise routine had been modified. Today was different. Today she wasn't just maintenance. Sean approached first. Flight suit. Already on, expression curious. I heard Wright gave you some kind of special assignment. Something like that. Sam checked her tablet. Are you flying today's exercise? Leading Bravo flight. Why? Because I'm going to show you how to beat the Typhoons jamming. Chun's eyebrows shot up. Show me? You're still maintenance. Not exactly. Sam pulled out her tablet, opening to a page filled with electromagnetic diagrams. Wright approved me to develop practical training scenarios. Turns out the best way to teach electronic warfare is to demonstrate it. Parker joined them, followed by 3 other pilots from Bravo. Squadron. Word was spreading that something unusual was happening. Listen up, Sam said, gathering the small group around the simulator. For 8 weeks, I've been watching you get jammed by techniques that you could counter if you understood them. Today that changes. She pointed to her first diagram. The Typhoons are using predictive frequency hopping to confuse your sensors. They're not just broadcasting jamming randomly. They're creating mathematical patterns that anticipate your countermeasures. We know they're using frequency hopping, Parker said. Every electronic warfare system does. But not like this. Sam flipped to another page. Watch Captain Muller during his next approach. He'll start at frequency band Charlie, then hop to Echo, then to Alpha, not random shifts, but a precise mathematical progression designed to stay ahead of your countermeasures. Chun studied the diagram, so how do we counter it? By interrupting their prediction algorithm. When you detect the first frequency shift, execute this sequence. Sam sketched quickly. Instead of chasing each new frequency, jump ahead in the pattern. Force them to adapt to you instead of the reverse. That's exactly what you told me yesterday, Chun said. It worked perfectly, because the technique is sound. The Typhoons know it too. It's how they defend against similar tactics. Lieutenant Commander Scott Davis appeared at the edge of the group, his expression skeptical. Reynolds, this is all theoretical. How do we know these techniques work against real jamming? Sam met his gaze directly. Because today I'm going to demonstrate exactly how they work from the Typhoon's perspective. The group fell silent. Davis looked confused. Your maintenance. You don't operate electronic warfare systems. Today I do. Wright approved a new training protocol. I'm going to simulate Typhoon jamming techniques while you practice the countermeasures. She could see the doubt in their faces. The maintenance technician, the one they'd dismissed for weeks, was now claiming she could outperform them in electronic warfare. Here's how it works, Sam continued. Normal exercise parameters, but I'm authorized to operate the jamming simulator. I'll use the frequency hopping techniques the Typhoons have been employing. Your job is to apply the countermeasures I've just described. Shun looked intrigued. What if the countermeasures don't work? Then you'll get jammed by the maintenance tech, and you'll have learned something valuable about the techniques you're facing. Davis crossed his arms. And if they do work? Then you'll be prepared to beat the Typhoons at their own game. An hour later, the morning briefing took on an unprecedented character. Commander Harrison stood at the front, clearly uncomfortable. With the new training protocol, today's exercise will feature modified parameters, he announced. The electronic warfare simulator will be operated by Technician Reynolds using simulated foreign tactics. This is an experimental training scenario. Approved by Captain Wright. Murmurs filled the room. Several pilots looked confused, others excited. The Typhoon pilots, seated together in the front rows, exchanged glances. Captain Muller raised his hand. Sir, will the simulator be employing our actual techniques? That's classified, Captain, but you're welcome to observe the exercise and provide feedback during debrief. Muller nodded, but Sam caught something in his expression. Professional curiosity mixed with what might have been respect. 30 minutes later, Sam was seated at the electronic warfare simulator. The system powered up and ready. For the first time in 8 weeks, she wasn't relegated to the sidelines. Her headset was active on the tactical frequency. Control, this is Phantom. Requesting permission to activate jamming simulation. Phantom, Wright had assigned her a temporary call sign for the exercise. No longer just maintenance or technician, she was Phantom, a name that suggested invisibility, stealth, and the ability to appear where least expected. Phantom, control. You are cleared to begin jamming operations. The advised Bravo flight is already in position. Phantom, this is Bravo leader. Chun's voice came through clearly. Are you ready to show us what you've got? Sam smiled as she initialized the simulator. Bravo leader, Phantom. Let's see if you've been paying attention. She activated the first jamming sequence, targeting Chun's F-35 with the exact frequency hopping pattern she'd observed the Typhoons using. On Chun's sensors, It would appear as if her radar was being systematically blocked across multiple bands. "Bravo, leader, you should be experiencing the jamming pattern now," she called over the radio. "Roger, Phantom. My sensors are degrading across all frequencies. The pattern matches what you showed us. Now execute the countermeasure." She watched on her display as Chun's aircraft deployed the precise frequency jump sequence Sam had taught her, leapfrogging ahead of the jamming pattern rather than chasing each frequency change. "Contact." Chun's voice carried excitement. "I'm cutting through the jamming. My sensors are clearing." "Excellent. That's exactly how you defeat predictive frequency hopping." For the next 40 minutes, Sam demonstrated technique after technique, always followed by the appropriate countermeasure. She showed them false sensor returns, coordinated jamming patterns, and electronic masking. Each time, the Bravo pilots applied her countermeasures and successfully defeated the tactics. But the real test came at the end of the exercise. "Phantom, this is Control. Alpha Flight is requesting permission to challenge your jamming capabilities directly." Sam felt her pulse quicken. The Typhoon pilots wanted to test her skills against their actual expertise, not just the simulations she'd been conducting. "Control, Phantom, tell Alpha I accept their challenge." "Roger, Phantom. Be advised this is an unofficial engagement. No scoring will be recorded." Which meant no rules, no restrictions, no safety margins, just electronic warfare operator against electronic warfare operator, technique against technique. "Phantom, this is Alpha Leader." Captain Muller's voice carried a hint of amusement. "Let's see how well you really understand our methods." As 4 Typhoons appeared on her scope, approaching from different vectors, Sam realized she was about to face the ultimate test of everything she'd learned. The maintenance technician was about to challenge the masters of electronic warfare. The Arctic sky stretched endlessly blue as 4 Typhoons converged on the training area, their electronic signatures registering clearly on Sam's simulator. She was outmatched, facing expert electronic warfare officers with years of specialized training while operating equipment she'd only been authorized to use hours earlier. Any rational person would have requested permission to disengage. Instead, Sam felt a rush of clarity as she initiated her first jamming sequence. "Phantom beginning electronic countermeasures," she announced, her voice steady despite the butterflies in her stomach. "Alpha Leader to Phantom." Captain Muller's voice carried professional respect. "Are you certain you want to continue? No shame in declining against 4 dedicated EW specialists." "Alpha Leader, Phantom. I've been studying your techniques for 8 weeks. Time to see if I learned anything." In the observation room, the American pilots had gathered to watch the electronic battle unfold on large tactical displays. Sam could hear Chun's voice over the command channel. "Control, Bravo Flight is monitoring and standing by to observe." The first Typhoon came in fast, broadcasting the complex jamming pattern Sam had labeled Cascade Disruption in her notes. The technique employed multiple overlapping frequency bands that would overwhelm standard American defensive systems. She'd seen it disable F-35 sensors within seconds. This time she was ready. Instead of trying to counter each jamming band individually, Sam deployed a technique she'd developed through careful analysis, creating momentary gaps in the electronic spectrum that the cascade pattern couldn't fill. "Alpha 2, I see you adjusting your pattern," she called over the radio, redirecting her countermeasures to match the Typhoon's electronic shift. The German EW officer's surprise was audible in his transmission. "Phantom, how are you predicting our frequency shifts?" "Mathematics doesn't lie, Alpha 2. But Captain Mueller was already adapting." "Alpha Flight, execute Protocol Echo." Sam had never heard of Protocol Echo, but she recognized the electronic signature immediately as all 4 Typhoons synchronized their jamming systems. Each aircraft BROADCAST across different sections of the electromagnetic spectrum, creating a seamless wall of interference that would normally render American sensors completely blind. Textbook cross-spectrum dominance, she muttered to herself, her fingers flying across the simulator controls. The technique was brilliant in its simplicity. By dividing the electronic battlespace among 4 aircraft, the Typhoons created seamless coverage that should have been impossible to penetrate. The observation room fell silent as the tactical displays showed American sensors going dark under the coordinated attack. But Sam had spent weeks analyzing exactly this scenario. Physics beats tactics, she said to herself as she initiated her counter protocol. Instead of trying to break through the electronic wall, she focused on its architecture. In any coordinated jamming effort, aircraft had to communicate with each other to maintain synchronization. Those communications, no matter how encrypted or brief, created momentary vulnerabilities. Sam targeted those microscopic gaps, inserting precisely timed pulses that disrupted the Typhoons' coordination. Not enough to break their jamming entirely, but enough to create fractures in their electronic wall. Alpha 3, your synchronization is slipping, she announced, targeting the weakest link in their formation. Impossible, came the reply. Our systems are perfectly aligned. Sam watched her displays as the German officer attempted to reinforce his jamming pattern, exactly as she'd predicted. In doing so, he momentarily increased his aircraft's electronic emissions, creating a signature Sam could isolate from the others. Alpha 3, you're electronically visible, she called, simulating a targeting lock on his aircraft. A pause. Then, confirmed Phantom, how did you penetrate our wall? Before she could answer, Muller was already shifting tactics. Alpha Flight, disperse and implement individual patterns. The 4 Typhoons immediately broke their synchronized jamming, each aircraft adopting a unique electronic signature to confuse identification and targeting. It was an advanced tactic Sam had rarely seen them employ, a sign they were taking her seriously. The observation room erupted in chatter as American pilots watched the unprecedented electronic battle unfolding. They'd never seen anyone force the Typhoons to abandon their primary jamming strategy so quickly. Sam knew this next phase would be the most challenging. With each Typhoon operating independently, she would need to track and counter 4 different jamming patterns simultaneously. Her simulator screen filled with electronic signatures, a chaos of overlapping frequencies and power levels that would overwhelm most operators. But chaos was a pattern of its own, and Sam had spent weeks studying exactly how these pilots responded under pressure. Each had individual habits, preferred frequency bands, and reaction times. She documented it all in her private analysis. Alpha 4, you always default to K-band when pressured, she called out, targeting the youngest German officer with a precise counter-jamming pulse. How? The pilot's surprise was cut short as his jamming effectiveness dropped dramatically. Alpha 1, your pattern has a 3-second cycle. She shifted her focus to Muller's aircraft, timing her countermeasures to exploit the brief vulnerability at each pattern reset. The remaining 2 Typhoons pulled into a defensive electronic posture, their pilots clearly reassessing their approach. These were the experts, the most experienced electronic warfare officers in the German Air Force. They wouldn't be surprised again. Alpha leader to all units. Muller's voice betrayed no frustration, only professional admiration. She studied our individual techniques. Fall back to Formation Omega. Formation Omega. Sam had never encountered this protocol in her observations. The 4 Typhoons began a complex electronic dance, continuously exchanging jamming patterns among themselves so that no aircraft maintained the same signature for more than a few seconds. It was brilliant. By constantly rotating their electronic identities, they prevented her from isolating and countering any individual aircraft. The technique was like watching 4 expert card players continuously passing cards around the table, making it impossible to track any single card. Alpha leader, Sam acknowledged, genuine respect in her voice. "That's not in any of my observations. Some tricks we keep in reserve, Phantom." Sam studied her displays, watching the rotating electronic signatures with growing concern. This wasn't a technique she could counter with her current understanding. For the first time in the engagement, she felt truly outmatched. In the observation room, the American pilots watched as Sam's countermeasures began failing against the Typhoon's coordinated rotation. After forcing the Germans to abandon 2 of their primary jamming strategies, it seemed the maintenance technician had finally met her match. But Sam Reynolds hadn't spent 8 weeks analyzing patterns just to give up when faced with a new one. If she couldn't isolate individual aircraft, perhaps she could exploit the rotation itself. She began timing the pattern exchanges, noticing that despite their complexity, they occurred at regular intervals. Every electronic system, no matter how sophisticated, required precise timing to function properly. That timing was a potential weakness. "Control, requesting authorization to access base clock synchronization," she called to the command center. A pause. "Phantom, explain your request." "Their rotation depends on precise timing. If I can introduce a synchronization error into the simulator, I might disrupt their pattern." Captain Wright's voice came through clearly. "Authorization granted, Phantom. Show us what you've got." Sam quickly adjusted her simulator's clock settings, introducing a deliberate 1 millisecond error into the system's timing protocol. To most electronic systems, such a tiny discrepancy would be irrelevant. But in the precisely choreographed dance of Formation Omega, even microsecond variations could create cumulative errors. She waited 3 full rotations, allowing the timing discrepancy to propagate through the system. Then, at the exact moment when the Typhoons would be executing their pattern exchange, she broadcast a precisely calibrated pulse across all frequencies. The effect was immediate. The slight timing error, combined with her interference pulse, caused the Typhoons to miss their synchronized exchange by fractions of a second. Their jamming patterns briefly overlapped, creating momentary gaps in their electronic defense. "Alpha Flight, pattern discrepancy," one of the German officers called out, his voice tight with concentration. "Maintain rotation discipline," Muller responded, but it was too late. Sam had found the seam in their electronic armor. She focused all her countermeasures on the gaps created by their imperfect synchronization, methodically widening the electronic breach until she could isolate individual aircraft signatures. "Alpha 4, you're exposed," she announced, simulating a targeting lock on the first Typhoon. Before the German pilot could react, she shifted focus. "Alpha 2, also exposed." 2 down, 2 to go. The remaining Typhoons abandoned formation. Omega, recognizing that its effectiveness had been compromised. Muller and his wingmen pulled into a tight electronic defense, their jamming systems linked in a final effort to maintain electronic superiority. "Alpha Leader, impressive adaptation," Muller acknowledged. "Where did you learn to exploit synchronization errors?" "Digital clock systems were my specialty in technical school," Sam replied. "Every electronic pattern has a heartbeat. Find it, and you can predict its rhythm." For the next 5 minutes, they engaged in a sophisticated electronic duel, each anticipating and countering the other's moves like chess grandmasters. Sam found herself pushed to the limits of her knowledge, improvising countermeasures based on theoretical principles rather than documented observations. But Muller was the more experienced electronic warfare officer, and gradually his superior training began to show. He found ways to mask his timing patterns, introducing deliberate irregularities that prevented her from exploiting predictable intervals. Sam felt her advantage slipping away. She had forced the Typhoons to abandon 3 different jamming protocols, an unprecedented achievement for someone with no formal electronic warfare training. But Muller's experience was proving decisive in this final engagement. Then she remembered something from her earliest observations, a subtle characteristic of the Typhoons. Electronic warfare systems that she documented but never fully understood. Under certain conditions, their jammers produced a distinctive, harmonic pattern when operating at maximum power. This electronic fingerprint was unique to each aircraft. If she could provoke Muller into pushing his system to maximum output, she might be able to identify and exploit his specific harmonic pattern. "Alpha Leader, your jamming effectiveness is decreasing," she called, deliberately provoking him with an incorrect assessment. Muller didn't respond verbally, but his electronic signature shifted subtly, increasing power output to prove her wrong. It wasn't enough to reveal his harmonic pattern, but it showed he was responsive to challenges. Sam decided on a calculated risk. She deliberately reduced her countermeasures against his jamming, creating the impression that her systems were failing. It was electronic bait, designed to encourage him to press his advantage by increasing power. "Control, experiencing simulator degradation," she announced, making sure Muller would hear her apparent distress. As she'd hoped, the German pilot increased his jamming power to exploit her supposed vulnerability. As his system approached maximum output, the distinctive harmonic pattern appeared on her frequency analysis display, a unique electronic fingerprint she'd documented weeks earlier. "There you are," she whispered, immediately targeting the specific frequencies that characterized Muller's jamming system. Rather than trying to overpower him, she transmitted precisely calibrated pulses that created destructive interference. With his harmonic pattern, it was like finding the resonant frequency of a wine glass and singing the perfect note to shatter it. Muller's jamming effectiveness collapsed as her countermeasures exploited the unique characteristics of his system. "Alpha Leader, your electronic defenses are compromised," she announced, simulating a targeting lock on his aircraft. The radio fell silent. Even Mueller's wingman seemed stunned by the reversal. Captain Muller's voice came through, professional and measured, despite the unexpected defeat. "Remarkable analysis, Phantom. I've never seen anyone identify system harmonics in real time." In the observation room, the American pilots erupted in cheers. They had just witnessed a maintenance technician force 4 elite electronic warfare specialists to exhaust their primary jamming protocols, then defeat the most experienced among them through pure technical innovation. "Control to all units. Exercise concluded," came the announcement. All aircraft returned to standard training parameters. As Sam powered down the simulator, she became aware of Commander Harrison standing behind her, his expression unreadable. "Control, Phantom returning system to standby mode," she said, carefully following proper shutdown procedures. "Outstanding performance, Reynolds," Harrison said quietly. "Captain Wright wants a full debriefing in 30 minutes. As she gathered her notes, Sam realized that she had just redefined her place at Coldwater. She'd entered the simulator room as a maintenance technician with something to prove. She was leaving as something else entirely, someone whose expertise could no longer be dismissed. The debriefing room was packed beyond capacity. Every pilot from both squadrons had crowded in, along with electronic warfare officers, intelligence specialists, and senior commanders. Captain Wright sat at the front, with Captain Muller beside her. The atmosphere crackled with an energy Sam had never experienced before. "Let's begin with the obvious," Wright said, surveying the room. "What we witnessed today was unprecedented. Technician Reynolds, without formal electronic warfare training, forced 4 specialized EW officers to abandon their primary jamming protocols, then defeated their commander using techniques she developed through independent analysis." Muller nodded in agreement. "In 20 years of electronic warfare operations, I have never seen anyone adapt so quickly to our protocols. The harmonics exploitation was particularly impressive, a technique we consider advanced even for specialized officers." "Commander," Harrison, who had been notably quiet, finally spoke. "Captain Wright, while the results are impressive, We still have a procedural violation to address. Technician Reynolds accessed systems and information outside her authorization. Wright fixed Harrison with a steady gaze. Commander, the only violation I see is our failure to recognize exceptional talent and utilize it appropriately. Technician. Reynolds developed countermeasures through observation and analysis that our specialized teams missed completely. She turned to the room at large. The purpose of today's exercise was to demonstrate that effective electronic warfare doesn't depend on rank or specialty designation, but on understanding and innovation. Reynolds has proven that maintenance personnel can contribute to tactical development when given the opportunity. Sam sat quietly, absorbing the impact of Wright's words. This wasn't just about her personal vindication. It was about challenging the rigid specialization that often prevented talented individuals from contributing beyond their assigned roles. Moving forward, Wright continued, I'm implementing a cross-functional electronic warfare initiative. Personnel from all specialties will have the opportunity to contribute to tactical development. Technician Reynolds will serve as program coordinator, reporting directly to me. The announcement sent ripples of surprise through the room. Harrison's expression darkened, but he remained silent. Captain Muller, Wright turned to the German officer. Would you share your assessment of today's exercise with the room? Muller stood, his posture impeccable. The most dangerous assumption in warfare is that your adversary thinks the same way you do. Today, Technician Reynolds demonstrated why. She approached electronic warfare not as a pilot or a specialized officer would, but as a technician, focusing on the fundamental systems rather than tactical doctrine. He looked directly at Sam. In the Luftwaffe, we have a saying, the most valuable perspective is the one you don't possess. Today, your maintenance perspective defeated our tactical one. As the debriefing concluded, pilots and officers crowded around Sam, asking questions about her observations and countermeasures. Shun pushed through to her side. That was incredible, she said. You forced them to burn through 4 different jamming protocols in under an hour. I just applied what I observed, Sam replied, still processing the dramatic shift in her. Status? No, Chun shook her head. You didn't just observe, you understood. That's something different entirely. Captain Muller approached, extending his hand. Technician Reynolds, might I have a word? Shun excused herself, leaving Sam alone with the German officer. She expected professional courtesy, perhaps a few technical questions. Instead, Muller smiled with genuine respect. You know why you defeated me today? He asked. I got lucky with the harmonics pattern. No, Muller shook his head. You succeeded because you weren't constrained by formal training. You saw possibilities that I was trained to overlook. He handed her a small notebook. These are my personal observations on electronic warfare patterns. I'd like you to have them. Perhaps you'll see something in them that I cannot. The gesture left Sam speechless. One of Europe's top electronic warfare experts was offering her his private notes, acknowledging her as a peer rather than a technician. Thank you, sir. I don't know what to say. Say you'll continue challenging assumptions. The best electronic warfare officers aren't those who follow doctrine, but those who question it. As Muller walked away, Sam realized that everything had changed. For 8 weeks, she'd been invisible, relegated to basic maintenance, told her. Knowledge didn't matter. Now suddenly, she was at the center of a new initiative that could transform how the Navy approached electronic warfare. But attention in the military came with responsibility. Some would see her rapid advancement as meritocratic recognition of talent. Others would view it as preferential treatment that undermined traditional career progression. The coming weeks would determine which narrative prevailed. Captain Wright approached as the room emptied. Walk with me, Reynolds. They stepped outside into the bitter Arctic air, breath-forming clouds in the twilight. You understand what happened today goes. Beyond electronic warfare tactics, Wright said. Yes, ma'am. Good, because tomorrow, the real work begins. Dr. Norris has already lodged a formal complaint about our circumvention of classification protocols. Commander Harrison believes this sets a dangerous precedent for chain of command. And several senior officers are concerned about a maintenance technician leading a tactical development program. Sam's heart sank. I understand, ma'am. If you need to reconsider my position, stop right there. Wright's voice cut through the cold air. I didn't bring you out here to prepare you for demotion. I brought you here to prepare you for a fight. She turned to face Sam directly. The Navy doesn't change easily, Reynolds. Bureaucracy, tradition, specialization, these are powerful forces. What you did today threatened all of them by proving that talent doesn't always follow rank or designation. That makes you both valuable and dangerous. What do you want me to do, ma'am? I want you to do exactly what you did today. See patterns others miss. Question assumptions. Find solutions that cross traditional boundaries. But understand that not everyone will celebrate your success. Some will actively work to ensure you fail. Sam nodded slowly, absorbing the captain's warning. Why take the risk, ma'am? Why support me against that kind of opposition? Wright was quiet for a moment, her gaze distant. 20 years ago, I was a junior electronic warfare officer with ideas that didn't fit standard doctrine. My commander shut me down, told me to stay in my lane. 6 months later, we lost 2 aircraft to electronic countermeasures I had identified, but wasn't permitted to address. She looked back at Sam. I promised myself I would never be that commander. The one who values protocol over innovation, rank over insight. When you see talent, you nurture it, regardless of where it appears. As Wright walked away, Sam stood alone in the gathering darkness, watching aircraft lights blink across the twilight sky. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, institutional resistance, and the weight of expectations she'd never faced before. But for the first time since arriving at Coldwater, she had found her purpose, not just maintaining aircraft, but transforming how they fought. She had crossed the invisible boundary between those who support the mission and those who define it. The maintenance technician had become the innovator. The outsider had become essential. And tomorrow she would begin teaching others to see patterns where others saw only noise. Morning sunlight glinted off frost-covered aircraft as Sam walked across the flight line. 1 week had passed since the simulator challenge. A week of intense scrutiny, institutional resistance, and unexpected alliances. A transformation had occurred, not just in her role at Coldwater, but in how others perceived her. The Integrated Electronic Warfare Initiative, as Captain Wright had officially named it, was taking shape despite significant pushback from traditional command structures. Today would be its first true test. Not in simulation this time, but in actual flight operations. The operations center hummed with pre-mission activity as Sam entered, carrying the specialized tablet Wright had authorized for her new role. The room quieted momentarily as pilots and officers noticed her presence, no longer the maintenance technician lurking at the margins, but someone whose analysis had fundamentally changed their understanding of electronic warfare. Commander Harrison stood at the tactical display, reviewing flight patterns for the day's exercise. His acknowledgement of Sam was minimal, a slight nod as she took her position at the newly installed electronic warfare monitoring station. The friction between them remained palpable, though now tempered by the reality that Captain Wright had elevated her position despite his objections. Morning briefing in 5 minutes, Harrison announced, his voice carrying the practiced neutrality of a career officer adjusting to unwelcome changes in his command structure. Sam powered up her station, quickly reviewing the electromagnetic monitoring protocol she'd developed. Unlike the traditional single-focus analysis used by naval electronic warfare specialists, her system tracked cross-spectrum patterns, identifying relationships between seemingly unrelated emissions. It was an approach born from her maintenance background, seeing systems as integrated wholes rather than isolated components. Lieutenant Chun appeared beside her workstation, flight suit already on, expression determined. "Ready for the real thing?" "As ready as I'll ever be," Sam replied, trying to project confidence she didn't entirely feel. Simulations were one thing. Actual airborne operations with pilots' reputations and careers at stake was another entirely. "The squadron's behind you," Chun said quietly. "Not just because you helped us counter the Typhoons, because you stood up when no one else would." Before Sam could respond, Captain Wright entered, followed by several senior officers Sam didn't recognize. The room snapped to attention. "As you were," Wright said, moving to the front of the room. "Today's exercise introduces new parameters. For the first time, we'll be incorporating real-time electromagnetic analysis from our Integrated Electronic Warfare Initiative." She gestured toward Sam's station. "Technician Reynolds will provide tactical electronic warfare guidance during the engagement, with authority to recommend countermeasures directly to flight leaders." The announcement caused visible reactions throughout the room. Several pilots exchanged glances while intelligence officers whispered among themselves. Harrison's expression remained carefully neutral, though the tightness around his eyes suggested contained disagreement. "Our visitors today," Wright continued, indicating the unfamiliar officers, "are from Naval Air Systems Command. They're here to evaluate the initiative's effectiveness in actual flight operations." The stakes had just increased dramatically. NAVAIR's involvement meant the program was being considered for potential fleet-wide implementation or termination. "Commander Harrison will continue overall tactical command," Wright clarified, a diplomatic acknowledgement of the traditional chain of command. "Technician Reynolds' role is advisory, focused specifically on electronic warfare countermeasures." Harrison stepped forward. "Today's scenario simulates penetration of advanced electronic defenses. Alpha Squadron, led by Captain Muller's Typhoons, will employ integrated jamming protocols. Bravo Squadron, our F-35s, will attempt to maintain sensor effectiveness through the engagement zone." He turned to Sam. "Technician Reynolds has developed countermeasures based on her analysis. Bravo pilots, you will evaluate their effectiveness during the exercise." The phrasing was carefully neutral, neither endorsing nor rejecting her contributions, while clearly establishing that the pilots would judge her method's effectiveness. It was as close to support as Harrison was willing to offer publicly. "One final note," Wright added. "This isn't just an exercise in electronic tactics. It's a test of how different perspectives strengthen our overall capability. Traditional specialists and unconventional analysts working together. That's the future of naval aviation." As the briefing concluded and pilots moved toward their aircraft, one of the Navarre officers approached Sam's station. His uniform carried the insignia of a captain, but his demeanor suggested someone more accustomed to laboratories than flight lines. "Dr. Marcus Chun, Naval Research Laboratory," he introduced himself. "Captain Wright speaks highly of your analytical approach." "Thank you, sir," Sam replied, surprised by the civilian title preceding his military rank. "I'll be monitoring your methodology closely," he continued. "The Navy has invested billions in electronic warfare systems developed by specialized engineers. Your unorthodox background makes your insights particularly interesting." The statement carried multiple layers: acknowledgement of her unconventional position, skepticism about her lack of formal training, and genuine curiosity about her results. "I hope my analysis proves useful, sir," Sam answered carefully. "Results are what matter, Ms. Reynolds," he replied. "Not credentials." As he moved away, Sam realized that today's exercise would determine far more than local training protocols. NAVAIR's presence meant her approach was being considered for potential implementation across the fleet. a responsibility far beyond anything she'd imagined when documenting jamming patterns in her personal notes weeks ago. Commander Harrison's voice came through the operations channel as aircraft began taxiing. All units, communications check. Exercise begins in 15 minutes. Sam turned to her display, heart pounding as she prepared to advise combat pilots in real-time operations. The simulator challenge had proven her theoretical understanding, but today would test whether her insights translated to actual tactical advantage in the air. Electronic warfare monitoring active, she reported, forcing her voice to remain steady. Spectrum analysis initialized. Copy that, Control. Chun's voice responded from her F-35. Bravo Squadron is counting on you. Reynolds. The words carried weight beyond their simple meaning, a public declaration of trust from a combat pilot to the former maintenance technician now responsible for their electronic warfare effectiveness. Captain Mueller's voice followed, measured and professional. Alpha Squadron acknowledges. We'll be employing our full electronic warfare capability today. No holding back. The challenge was clear. The German pilots would use everything in their arsenal, testing Sam's countermeasures under combat-realistic conditions. As the aircraft reached their starting positions, Sam focused entirely on her electromagnetic displays. The Arctic sky remained clear of visible threats, but her screens already showed increased activity as the Typhoons powered up their jamming systems in preparation for engagement. Bravo Squadron, this is Control, she said, keying her communications to the American pilot's channel. I'm seeing pre-engagement electronic alignment from Alpha. They're preparing a coordinated frequency sweep across all bands. Copy, Control. Chun responded. Recommendations? Sam studied the emerging pattern, recognizing elements she'd documented previously while noting new variations. They're modifying the frequency progression we saw in simulation. Anticipate accelerated hopping between bands Charlie through Hotel. She transmitted specific frequency settings to the F-35's electronic warfare systems, adjustments that would allow them to maintain sensor effectiveness through the expected jamming patterns. Exercise begins in 3, 2, 1 mark, Harrison announced. Alpha Squadron, you are cleared to engage electronic warfare systems. The electromagnetic spectrum erupted with activity as the Typhoons initiated their jamming protocols. Sam's display filled with overlapping emissions, a chaotic electronic battlefield that would normally overwhelm standard analysis, but where others saw chaos, she recognized patterns. The Typhoons had indeed modified their approach, but the underlying mathematical progression remained consistent. Bravo Flight, adjust your bandwidth filters according to transmitted parameters, she instructed. The new pattern appears random, but follows a Fibonacci sequence through the spectrum. Anticipate next major shift to R-band in approximately 20 seconds. Chun's acknowledgement came through clearly. Implementing now. Sensors are maintaining integrity despite jamming attempts. The observation room had fallen silent, Navarre officers watching intently as Sam's predictions materialized on the tactical display. The Typhoons shifted their jamming exactly as she'd anticipated, but the F-35s, using her countermeasures, maintained sensor effectiveness where they would normally have been blinded. Remarkable pattern recognition, Dr. Chun murmured to Captain Wright. She's predicting their emissions shifts before they execute them, but Captain Meller wasn't easily defeated. Alpha Flight, implement secondary protocol, his voice came through the monitoring channel. Sam watched as the Typhoon's electronic signatures transformed, abandoning the predictable progression for what appeared to be truly randomized jamming across all frequencies simultaneously. Reynolds? Chun's voice carried concern as her sensors began degrading. They've shifted to something new. Our countermeasures are losing effectiveness. Sam studied the seemingly random pattern, searching for the underlying structure she knew must exist. Electronic warfare systems, no matter how sophisticated, couldn't generate truly random sequences. They followed algorithms that created the appearance of randomization. "Give me 30 seconds, she replied, fingers flying across her analytical interface as she ran the emissions through various mathematical models. The operations room tensed as the tactical display showed Bravo Squadron sensors deteriorating under Alpha's new jamming protocol. Harrison exchanged glances with the Never officers, his expression suggesting the expected failure of the unconventional approach. But Sam had seen something, a subtle periodicity hidden within the apparent chaos, a pattern so deeply embedded it would be invisible to standard analysis. "Bravo Flight, this isn't random jamming," she announced. "They're using a nested algorithm with frequency assignments based on prime number intervals, transmitting countermeasure parameters now." She sent revised electronic warfare settings to the F-35s, adjustments that seemed counterintuitive by traditional doctrine, but aligned perfectly with the mathematical structure she'd identified. "Implementing," Chun confirmed. "But this doesn't match any countermeasure protocol in our systems." "Trust the math," Sam responded simply. For several tense seconds, the tactical display showed no improvement. Harrison shifted uncomfortably, while Dr. Chun leaned forward with scientific curiosity. Then, gradually the F-35 sensors began cutting through the jamming, restoring targeting capability despite the Typhoon's sophisticated electronic attack. "Sensors clearing," Chun reported, unable to keep the surprise from her voice. "Whatever you did, it's working. We're getting clean returns through their jamming." The Naval officers exchanged glances, clearly impressed by the real-time adaptation to an electronic warfare technique that should have overwhelmed standard countermeasures. Captain Muller's voice carried professional admiration. "Impressive. Analysis control. That protocol was designed specifically to appear mathematically random." "No electronic pattern is truly random, Captain," Sam replied. "They all have a heartbeat if you know how to find it." For the next 45 minutes, the aerial electronic chess match continued. Each time the Typhoons adjusted their jamming techniques, Sam identified the underlying pattern and developed countermeasures that allowed the American pilots to maintain sensor effectiveness. What would normally have been a one-sided demonstration of electronic warfare superiority had become a balanced engagement, with each side adapting to the other's innovations in real time. "Final phase," Harrison announced as the exercise entered its concluding scenario. "Alpha Squadron will attempt maximum electronic deception, while Bravo Squadron maintains targeting through the terminal approach." This was the most challenging electronic warfare environment. Multiple jamming techniques combined with false target generation, creating a confusing electromagnetic battlefield, where differentiating actual aircraft from electronic ghosts became nearly impossible. "Bravo Flight, be advised," Sam called, noting a significant shift in the Typhoon's emissions. "They're implementing a complex deception protocol, multiple false signatures combined with targeted jamming of your identification systems." She studied the evolving pattern, recognizing elements she'd documented, but also noting innovative combinations she hadn't seen before. Muller was bringing his full expertise to bear for this final challenge. "I'm showing 8 potential targets," Chun reported. "Can't distinguish actual aircraft from electronic ghosts." Traditional electronic warfare doctrine had no effective counter to this level of signature manipulation. The standard approach was to systematically analyze each potential target, a time-consuming process that would allow the Typhoons to achieve tactical advantage. But Sam saw the situation differently. Her background in maintenance had taught her that every system had physical limitations, including electronic warfare generators. "Bravo Flight, don't try to analyze each signature individually," she instructed. "Focus on power fluctuations across the entire spectrum." "Power fluctuations?" Chun sounded confused. Standard procedure is to... This isn't about standard procedure, Sam interrupted. Their deception protocol requires precise power management across multiple frequencies. Real aircraft emissions will show microsecond power variations that simulated signatures can't perfectly replicate. It was an insight born not from electronic warfare doctrine, but from years of diagnosing subtle power fluctuations in aircraft systems, the kind of cross-domain knowledge that specialized training wouldn't provide. Transmitting modified sensor parameters, Sam continued, sending settings that would highlight power inconsistencies rather than attempting to analyze each signature's characteristics. Implementing, Chun acknowledged, though her tone suggested skepticism about the unconventional approach. The tactical display showed the F-35s adjusting their sensors according to Sam's instructions, focusing on the subtle energy variations across the electromagnetic spectrum rather than individual signature analysis. For several seconds, the display showed no improvement. Then, gradually, the false signatures began displaying subtle differences from the actual aircraft, microscopic power fluctuations that no deception system could perfectly simulate. "I'm getting differentiation," Chun reported, excitement building in her voice. 4 signatures showing power inconsistencies consistent with electronic generation. The other 4 maintain perfect stability across all bands. "Those are your actual targets," Sam confirmed. "The Typhoons can't maintain perfect power consistency across all frequencies while generating false signatures." The revelation transformed the engagement. The F-35 pilots, now able to distinguish actual aircraft from electronic deceptions, quickly established targeting solutions on the Typhoons, despite their sophisticated jamming. "Bravo 3 locked on Alpha Leader," Chun announced, simulating a missile launch against Muller's aircraft. One by one, the American pilots reported targeting solutions on the actual Typhoons, effectively countering what should have been an overwhelming electronic advantage. "Exercise concluded," Harrison announced as the engagement timer expired. All aircraft returned to base for debriefing. The operations room erupted in animated conversation as the Navarre officers gathered around Sam's station, examining her analytical methodology with newfound respect. Dr. Chun was particularly engaged, asking detailed questions about her cross-spectrum analysis approach. "You've essentially created a new electronic warfare paradigm," he concluded. "One based on system limitations rather than signal characteristics. That's revolutionary." Commander Harrison approached, his expression professionally neutral, but lacking the skepticism he'd shown earlier. "Effective real-time analysis," he acknowledged with a slight nod, the closest thing to approval Sam was likely to receive from him. Captain Wright joined them, unable to hide her satisfaction with the exercise's outcome. "Dr. Chun, I believe your team has seen enough to make a preliminary assessment." The Navarre scientist nodded. "More than enough. What Technician Reynolds has demonstrated today challenges our entire approach to electronic warfare countermeasures. We'll need to conduct further evaluation, but the initial results are compelling." As the aircraft returned and pilots entered the operations center, the mood was electric. Chun led a group of F-35 pilots directly to Sam's station, their earlier skepticism replaced by professional respect. "Whatever you did out there saved us from complete electronic blindness," Chun said. "Muller's deception protocol should have been unbeatable according to everything in our training." Captain Muller joined them, extending his hand to Sam with genuine respect. "In 20 years of electronic warfare operations, I've never seen anyone counter that protocol effectively." The power fluctuation analysis was brilliant, completely outside doctrinal thinking. The debriefing that followed was unlike any in Coldwater's history. Rather than the traditional top-down assessment led by senior officers, Sam found herself at the center of a collaborative analysis, with pilots and electronic warfare specialists from both squadrons contributing observations. about the effectiveness of her unconventional countermeasures. "The key insight," she explained, displaying her analytical methodology on the main screen, "is that electronic warfare isn't just about frequencies and algorithms. It's about the physical limitations of the systems generating those emissions." She highlighted the power fluctuation patterns that had allowed identification of actual aircraft. Among the electronic deceptions, no system maintains perfect power consistency while performing complex operations. Those microscopic variations create fingerprints that can't be perfectly disguised. Dr. Chun nodded appreciatively, a perspective that wouldn't occur to someone with traditional electronic warfare training. "You're seeing relationships that our specialized focus obscures." As the debriefing concluded, Captain Wright moved to the front of the room. Today's exercise demonstrated exactly why this initiative matters. Not because Technician Reynolds has revolutionary ideas, though she clearly does, but because diversity of perspective strengthens our overall capability. She surveyed the room, making eye contact with pilots, officers, and technicians alike. The most dangerous vulnerability in military operations isn't technological. It's intellectual homogeneity. Too many people with the same training, seeing problems the same way. Even Commander Harrison nodded slightly at this observation, his institutional resistance seemingly softened by the undeniable results of the day's exercise. "Moving forward," Wright continued, "the Integrated Electronic Warfare Initiative will expand beyond Coldwater. Navarre has authorized a fleet-wide pilot program based on today's results. Technician Reynolds will lead the analytical methodology development, working directly with electronic warfare officers to implement these new approaches." The announcement sent ripples of surprise through the room. What had begun as a local training innovation was now poised to transform Navy-wide electronic warfare doctrine. As the meeting dispersed, Sam found herself surrounded by pilots and officers who had previously ignored or dismissed her. Their questions were technical, respectful, focused on understanding her methodology rather than challenging her authority. Dr. Chun approached with Captain Wright. "We'll need you at Naval Air Systems Command next month to begin protocol development," he said. "Your approach needs to be formalized into training doctrine that can be implemented across the fleet." The reality of her transformation struck Sam with full force. 8 weeks ago, she'd been just maintenance, invisible among the elite pilots, her insights ignored, her potential dismissed. Now she stood at the center of a paradigm shift in naval electronic warfare, her perspective sought by the same institution that had once relegated her to the margins. As the operations center emptied, Commander Harrison approached her workstation. They hadn't spoken directly since the simulation challenge a week earlier. "Technician Reynolds," he began formally, "your performance today was exceptional." "Thank you, sir," Sam replied, recognizing the difficulty this acknowledgement presented for him. Harrison hesitated, then continued with unexpected candor. "I was wrong about your potential contribution. Not because I doubted your intelligence, but because I believed specialized training was the only path to expertise." The admission clearly cost him, but there was genuine reflection in his expression. The Navy doesn't adapt easily to unconventional talent. We create specialized tracks and expect everyone to stay within them. Sometimes that means missing perspectives we desperately need. "I understand, sir. The specialization exists for good reasons." "It does," he agreed. "But so does cross-domain innovation. Your maintenance background gave you insights our electronic warfare specialists missed entirely. That's worth reconsidering our assumptions about who contributes to tactical development." As Harrison walked away, Captain Wright joined. That might be the most significant victory of the day," she observed, changing Harrison's perspective on non-traditional expertise. "Do you think it will last?" Sam asked. "Institutional change never happens all at once," Wright replied. "It comes in moments like today, when results force reconsideration of deeply held assumptions. She gestured toward the emptying flight line, where maintenance crews were already preparing aircraft for tomorrow's operations. 8 weeks ago, you were out there, invisible despite your potential. Today, you're in here, transforming how we approach electronic warfare. The question is, how many other Reynolds are out there, with insights we're missing because we've decided they're just something? Sam thought about the maintenance technicians, logistics specialists, and countless other support personnel whose perspectives were routinely excluded from tactical development. I was lucky, she acknowledged. You gave me the opportunity to prove my analysis had value. Luck had nothing to do with it, Wright corrected. You documented jamming patterns when no one asked you to. You developed countermeasures without formal training. You prepared yourself for an opportunity that wasn't guaranteed to come. She smiled slightly. Your success wasn't about luck. It was about refusing to accept artificial limitations on your potential. As the Arctic sun cast long shadows across the flight line, Sam gathered her equipment, reflecting on the journey from dismissed maintenance technician to recognized electronic warfare innovator. The transformation hadn't happened because someone finally discovered her talent. It happened because she refused to confine her curiosity to her assigned role, observing, analyzing, and preparing for a moment when preparation met opportunity. Captain Muller approached as she was leaving, his expression thoughtful. You know, in the Luftwaffe, we have another saying. The most dangerous assumption is believing you know who your teachers will be. He glanced toward the maintenance crews working on his Typhoon. After today, I'll be looking more carefully at who might have insights I'm missing. As he walked away, Sam realized that her journey had become more than personal validation. It had opened a door for others, creating space for talent to emerge from unexpected places, for expertise to be recognized regardless of rank or specialty designation. The maintenance technician had become the innovator. The observer had become the strategist. The outsider had become essential. And tomorrow she would begin helping others cross the same boundaries, transforming just maintenance into just the beginning of what was possible when artificial limitations gave way to recognized potential. If you had told her 9 weeks ago that she would transform naval electronic warfare doctrine, she would have laughed in disbelief. Yet here she stood, proof that sometimes the most revolutionary insights come from exactly where conventional wisdom least expects to find them. In the end, they had dismissed her as just maintenance until she outsmarted 4 elite pilots. But her greatest victory wasn't proving them wrong. It was proving that labels never define potential. They merely reveal the limitations of those who apply them. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.